the stars be with you.
All right. Welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. Today we have a new guest joining me. We have Vivi Henriette with me here today. Thanks for joining me, Vivi.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. I'm always excited to interview a new guest because, I play favorites. I get a couple people that I like. And I just keep inviting them back on because I'm like, oh, I want to hang out with them again. But I was called through a little birdie of intuition in my head to reach out to Vivi and to invite her on for Scorpio season. So I'm glad you're able to join me.
I'm super happy to be here. And I love that I just feel like I'm naturally playing the part for those watching the video.
Where there's some this scorpionic vibes that we were joking around before where, I'm the Scorpio rising, but here I am looking more Leonian than the Leo rising. That looks very scorpionic. How ironic is that? So, well, before we get started here, because we're going to have a lot to talk about. Scorpio season's pretty packed with things going on in the skies. But tell the listeners who you are, what you got going on.
Yeah, so my name is Vivi Henriette. You can call me Vivi. I go under the moniker Art of the Zodiac. And I also interview people. I have a series called Talk, where I interview mostly astrologers, which was sort of an accidental thing. The idea was that I'd interview artists and astrologers, but these days it's been a lot of astrologers. And I'm on IG Live. I have a podcast. You can subscribe on Substack. So I do written interviews, audio interviews, video interviews, but really I just spend most of my life either, astrology and tarot, or as I say, exploring the radical act of conversation.
It is a radical act.
Yes.
You never know what could be said or where it can take you, right? That's the beauty of it.
It's kind of like, I love what you do, because just sort of flesh that out. I sort of thought of it as this sort of like anti my brain's
we were talking about the Mercury sun media on the South Node right now. Just FYI to all the listeners, as you go on in this program, we are talking in the midst of the South Node action.
I'm like the social media platform that just talks at you really fast.
Oh yeah, that one. Well, which one is that? They all do. TikTok's the one that talks the fastest.
That's what I was thinking about. Right? Yeah. Like this idea of like living very much in sort of a monologue world. So it's nice to sometimes slow down and have a conversation, right? See, I couldn't have figured that out in a monologue. I'd still be searching for
you would be there. You would have pressed pause and you'd be like, what was that again? And that's the beauty of this podcast is that there is never a pause. It does not pause. There are no edits. There are no cuts. So it is all live in theory, I guess we could say. So it's really is the art of conversation, the radical art of conversation, because you just got to be in it. So we are going to be talking all about Scorpio season 2023 today, which I'm always excited for Scorpio season because, hey, I'm a Scorpio rising. So for me, it's like my personal rejuvenation period where I'm like, get me the hell out of Libra. That was a ride. And I'm ready. I'm ready for something next. But we are in like the thick of it right now because we just had that solar eclipse in Libra a few days ago here, and we're getting ready for a lunar eclipse, the last one in the Taurus Scorpio axis. So it's not any old Scorpio. That's not your normal Scorpio season, I guess we could say.
Yeah, not your normal. But I will tell you, I've never thought that I would say that Scorpio season somehow feels like a breath of fresh air. I mean, I like Scorpio season, but I'm just like so over everything that's been happening that I'm really welcome this.
Yeah. And that, I mean, we always think about Scorpio season, right, as being this point of the yearly change, that, transmutative and transformative, compost time of the year, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, because this is our, the thickening of fall and the decomposition. But eclipses love to throw us new scenarios, especially south node eclipses, that we are here to compost. And so I could see how Scorpio season would be a breath of fresh air, because personally, I'm ready for change. How are you feeling on that front?
Oh no, absolutely. It's interesting. It feels like after like, you know, this past eclipse, like Venus retrograde, I feel like there's been just so much that like my personal feeling is like I'm ready for the compost. Just like turn me into goo. I'll emerge as a butterfly next year. Just done.
Yeah. You're like, just goo me up until spring. I'm good.
Cool.
I was reading something somewhere. I'm horrible. I'm like, somewhere someone taught me something and I can't credit them, but they're talking about, we always think about the two stages of the butterfly, right? It's the caterpillar, and then it goes into the goo, and then it's the butterfly. But really that there's a third incarnation, and that is the goo. Like that is the hinge is actually an incarnation in itself. And so we are in the third unspoken incarnation of the butterfly, and that is the goo state. And I am feeling super gooey. I'm feeling like very s'mores in a fire, sort of like sandwich me between some chocolate and some gingerbread or graham cracker, and just let me hang out until spring.
As you're talking, I'm just imagining like Scorpio, like fixed water being like just a big vat of jelly. And I just want to just like be in it. Also, I think you might have been talking about maybe Spencer Michaud, our mutual friend, who actually was like obsessed with like releasing butterflies this summer.
Oh yeah. Butterfly
fun.
Man.
Another fun butterfly fact adding to that, which I think feels relevant, is I didn't know this, but when the caterpillar gets ready to go into the cocoon, it just kind of knows its time, and it goes and like hangs itself and then just starts like the process. But I like that idea that just like it kind of crawls somewhere alone and then just starts like weaving this sort of fiber around.
Well, yeah. Well, when you were saying that, what came into my head was, even though this is a Piscean card, but the hangman, right? Yeah. Like when you just like literally the butterfly goes all hangman, or hanged one, to get into this state of what it's going to become. Because that's essentially what's happening here, is what are we going to become? Because after we go through a summer of Venus retrograde, we had a really potent Mercury retrograde, Pluto just stationed direct. We're having all these Pluto squares on a or Pluto squares on the south node. We're also having a first quarter in Pluto, which is happening, or did that already happen? What day is it? God, my concept of time is just
wait, today's Tuesday.
No, this is going to be.
I know the day. I'm very proud of myself for this.
This is actually going to be the weekend, probably when this podcast is going to air, is when there's going to be the first quarter on Pluto squaring all the, anyways, my whole point to that ramble was that there is a lot going on. There's a lot that has led up to the need to gooify and initiate these changes, right? And so that's what Scorpio season is going to bring us. So I loved your the image of the Jello. I'm thinking like a Jello mold, and how just nasty Jello dessert. No, I like Jello as a whole, but you know what I'm talking about, like the vintage
like the 1950s
Jello desserts.
The whole Jello
that might have a hot dog in it, and
it could have a hot dog, could have a scorpion in it, like
could have anything.
It's
like, just put it in Jello, people will eat it.
Or at least look at it.
Yeah, isn't it pretty? It wiggles when but I love that analogy. I feel like there was something, I don't know why I'm thinking Jello bath. Is that a thing, or is that something that I've made up in my head? Like I feel like at some point in my life I saw.
It sounds like a fancy spa service. Like I could imagine like collagen Jello.
Oh gosh. 15 things to add to your bath. Gelatin is one of them. Gelatin has also been shown to balance serotonin levels and treat mood issues. That's so funny. You don't have to be in a tub of sticky jello, but you could pour some gelatin in your water. I think I saw some art thing or some movie a long time ago where maybe it was like a joke and they put some jello in a pool and then it turned into it. And so I'm having a vague, hazy memory, is what's coming up now. But we just learned something, right? Put gelatin in your tub. You can help your nails and your mood. So let's talk about fixed water just in general, and also Mars, because that's the whole kind of backbone to Scorpio energy are these qualities. So what's your take on just either one of those or the combination of both fixed water and Mars as a planet?
Okay. I mean, I have a very, I want to say particular relationship with Mars. I love Mars. I mean, I'm not going to like not love any planet. I think of Mars as like the warrior, but I also think, I was thinking about this earlier, like Mars and Scorpios. I have Mars in Aries, so I have a little bit of envy for people who have Mars and Scorpio, because I think there's a level of like determination and strategy there, right? As we just sort of entered Mars and Scorpio. I don't know why, but when you're talking, this sort of just thinking about Mars coming out of Libra and like with the South Node, how it just felt like such a like unhappy Mars, like it just felt so disastrous. And I was thinking about Scorpio season with Mars coming home, like just the phrase that came to mind was now we get to sit in our sadness. Like felt like there was like this hurricane of stuff happening, and now it's like, okay, sit in your sadness and think about how you want to proceed next.
So yeah, not gestate in your gloom. No. Well, I mean, Scorpio is known as a sometimes brooding sign. It's just the nature of it. We just went, as we're talking right now, the moon just moved into Sagittarius, and so we just went through a couple days of having the moon in Scorpio. And that moon is in fall for a reason. It has this quality where maybe things just go along and everything's kind of fine and you're on it, but if you get that anger, if you get that irritation, if something is disrupted or goes wrong, or doesn't go how you want it to go, essentially, right? Mars has its own directive. It wants things to go a particular way, and when it doesn't, the emotional response, the fall of the Scorpio moon, like, ooh, I had one yesterday. I had like a severe, it's like I fell out of a moon tree. I just like my whole mood just was shot for the whole day for something that had happened. And it really helped me understand that moon placement of the Scorpio moon, because I mean, I have the Capricorn moon, so I understand the detriment or the debility of a malefic ruled moon. Saturn's a different flavor than Mars, obviously, because Mars gets real broody. Mars gets real angry. Mars gets, can get desperate, like kind of flailing out to, a lot of times take action on things that there's really no action to be taken on, or if you can't have action.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of times the emotional response gets so just rough and maybe even almost defeating, because there's nothing you can do, right? And so you have to just acquiesce to the feeling itself. So I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but just kind of understanding like the broodiness and kind of the depths of emotion that you can be taken whenever any planet is in Scorpio. But especially since we're entering Scorpio season.
I always think of a sensitivity too, right? Like that's the thing of the moon in Scorpio. It's like almost like it's feeling everything, but it like, I don't know, but then there's also this sort of need to protect itself as well. And like, I feel like feelings and protection sounds so bad, like don't go that well, right? Like I think of like the moon and like Cancer.
Well, it's a vulnerable planet, right?
Yeah. And it's like the way if it feels like on guard, it like gets really defensive. I think of that too. There's sort of like a lashing out, like the idea, like when people like lash out because they're really hurt, but then all you're getting is that sort of anger storm.
Yeah.
That's what I think of the moon.
Or, we think about the moon being our point of nurturance, and maybe we're nurturing other people, but we're also nurturing ourselves. We're constantly trying to nurture and take care of ourselves. Like that's just the nature of being human. And keeping up with this world. And so there can be, you know, the Scorpio tail doesn't always lash out to others. A lot of times it can lash out internally. And that's when the emotions just inside get just like, and you know, you gotta like, you gotta be nice to yourself. You gotta, you know, it's not as bad as it seems, or, you know, poking that wound over and over again is not going to change the scenario. It's like, you've got to be proactive with the content in a different way. And so I don't know if anybody can relate to Scorpio moon stuff like this, or even in the just last couple days after the solar eclipse. We can take whatever that energy was and then allow the sun to come in, right? Because the sun is the point of the spotlight. This is where we get the conscious awareness. This is where everything is just brought into almost just an illuminative point that helps us focus on issues there that can be then integrated somehow because we understand them. So give me three. I'm like, I don't know if I want to use the word generic, but they could seem generic in your own mind, just because, you know, as astrologers, we start like, oh, this is this is that. But there's like three qualities of Scorpio that just stand out in your mind right away, just working with the sign or experiencing it. What is a Scorpio?
Ooh, I think cutting, psychological, and protective.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you've heard this before, but something I'm going to totally steal from Diana Rose Harper, but she was talking about the idea of Scorpio being like a well, right? Like there's only so much water. And so oftentimes we think of like this like swamp or something, but this idea that you have this like fixed amount, right, of like clean water. And so there's that need to protect it. And that sort of hearing that changed the way that I think about Scorpio, maybe more compassionate to it as a sign.
Yeah. It's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. And that's the, you know, that's the thing with Scorpio is it can keep it under wraps. It could keep it a secret. It could keep it rather mysterious. And I know a lot of people that are either Scorpios themselves or strong Scorpio planets are in partnership with Scorpio planets. And they're like, the Scorpio will be, the protectiveness also bleeds into loyalty. But how much do you truly know of this person? Because when it's people are trying to protect the water, protect the well.
Yeah.
It's like, how much do you get let in? How much do you really know? How much are they willing to expose or give?
Yeah.
So yeah, that no, I just like that could be just something that comes up this season too, when we think about all these changes that we're going through and how it might require some of that vulnerability that we're talking about, that's not always comfortable with Scorpio energy.
I was going to ask you a question.
Oh yeah,
as a Scorpio rising, right? Like when I talk about this idea of like protecting or like you know, being on guard, like how have you experienced that as a Scorpio rising, and has your relationship to that changed throughout your life?
Was just Scorpio in general, like Scorpio
like
energy,
thinking about this idea of maybe you know, as a Scorpio rising, have you noticed that maybe you tend to be like on guard or maybe a little like scared of getting vulnerable with people? And has that like something that's you've learned to work with? Like, so if you think of your own life, can you think of like how maybe you've personally worked with the sort of Scorpio archetypes?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, Scorpios are known for this, and I will own up to this as well. Like, especially Scorpio risings, you get in a conversation with someone, you'll be like, "Oh yeah, tell me what's going on with you. What's, you know, like, give me all this stuff." And then they'll ask you a question, and you're like, "Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's you know, there's a barrier where you're just like, who do I let in here?" And then there's other times because, you know, I think about Saturn being a planet of boundaries, but I think Scorpio is also a gatekeeper of boundary sort of energy. And trust, right? That's a big thing with the Taurus Scorpio axis, is that trust, you know, who do I let in and who do I not? And sometimes it's just too much energy to let people in. Cause I'm like, it's not even that I don't want to tell them things. It's just like, I just don't have the energy to, you know, like you're not, you know, you're not in, it's not worth it to me to have that conversation. But there's also just a general, protective is definitely a good word. Protective of the self, right? Because that's the thing with this being a Scorpio rising, is the rising is the body, the rising is the self, rising is me. So being on guard and aware. I used to have a partner back when I was like 21 or something like that. And I remember one time he got super mad at me, and he was just like, nothing gets past you. He's like, not a single thing. Like that, and it just irritated him because, you know, pair that with my Saturn and Virgo. And of course I might've been a little like on him or a little nitpicky about, you know, like just always calling things out. Because that's the thing is Scorpio energies, it can see. It's like it's on the it's the no BS sign. So if something's going on, it's gonna call it out. It's gonna see it. It's gonna see through other people's stuff and other people's motives. Like you cannot pull anything over on the Scorpio.
I'm curious, do you have like people, you know, I just borrowed Diana Rose Harper's like well analogy for the Scorpio, but like when you think of that, like the sort of, do you have an image for the Scorpio that like sees all? Like if you had to,
like an image of the Scorpio that's
like if you were thinking about the sign and you were trying to like describe it in an image, like the imagery for what you just said, what would that be?
Well, when you said that, immediately what came to mind was like an actual scorpion, but it just had like a massive third eye. Or maybe the third eye is in the tail. Maybe it's like the actual, and then the so it's got that pinchers and the tail comes up, and the tail is just this big eyeball. And then the eyeball opens up, and it can be wait, does the tail have a pincher? Yeah, of course it does. That's what it does, right? I'm like looking for a picture of a scorpion right now. Anyways, that's what comes to my head. So that being said, right, the sun comes into Scorpio. The sun is going to light things up. Well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about what lurks underneath. We're talking about maybe the bullshit or the secrets or the things. And that could be of like things that are hidden from you by other people or the world in general, but it'll also be your own stuff where you're like, all of a sudden you get a spotlight on your on your own BS and how to deal with that. And especially from an emotional angle. And you're like, you know what, if I really want to change my life, I got to change these reactive patterns. I got to change the way I, just kind of like that Seven of Swords energy where like in the Seven of Cups sort of energy where I'm just kind of like not deceiving my own self but sometimes we do. We think we're just in the mode of how we do things. And unless we call ourselves on it, and a lot of times what happens is other people call us on it, and then we're like, I don't know about that, or it's defensive mode right away. But if we really look at that and take that information in, maybe that's can be very helpful, especially with our last eclipse in Scorpio and Taurus. So how are you feeling just with the eclipse season anyways, just right now, just personally? I mean, you don't have to get in personal details, but just like kind of how you're feeling it, the vibe.
You know, I was thinking about this. It's interesting that we're in this transition time because we just had the eclipse, the Aries Libra axis, where it's going to continue, right? And we're about to have the final eclipse in the Scorpio Taurus axis. And I think when I've been thinking about the past period of time, like, I don't know, the Scorpio Taurus eclipses to me really felt a lot about like just uncovering bullshit. I think that's a great way to put it. There was a lot of just dealing with this, just like emotionally, where are we at? I almost think about like a psychological cleanse in a sense, right? Of like, okay, if we want to get to this earthly thing, what do we have to like clean up in a way? And you know, it's interesting. I think there's this new eclipse season feels so much more volatile to me, right? Like the Aries Libra is always like almost feel like what is the spark of fire and what do we want to initiate? And then because of that, like what kind of contracts do we have to renegotiate? Right. So it feels there's been a lot of like thinking about like clearing our minds, and now we have to act. And so it's interesting. Like, I don't know, like last week, I think the general consensus of people around me was just this like almost like the dragon ride of like no sleep, but then like just wanting to crash, right? Like this sort of high, low, lows, just like a lot of that. And so I know I shouldn't be like, they're eclipses, right? We don't know what to expect from them, but it almost feels just in general, like I don't care. Going into Scorpio season feels like I'm okay with now, just, even if I have to sit in my room and be really goth and like look at my own bullshit, and that's hard, I'm like okay with the sadness for a while. Like I'm just okay to just sit with my stuff, even though it may not feel that good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because I mean, you sit with it, right? And maybe you might not feel good for a couple of days or so, or maybe even a couple of weeks, depending on how much stuff you have to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's where the empowerment comes, right? Because that's where the surge of the, you know, claiming your stuff and then claiming yourself after it comes back on the other end, because it's not like you just, you know, we always make underworld sort of, I mean, these are just Plutonian jokes where you're just like, you got to go through it. It's the only way out is through. Well, Scorpio energy has that same thing. It's not, and you can get stuck in the through. That's true.
But
I think you can get stuck in the Jello. You can get tantalized by a Jello dessert that does you wrong, and then you're down there for too long. But no, it feels like there's something about, especially with the potent Sun-Mars synodic cycle that is going to be a part of this season, which is a huge part of this season, and just astrological transits in general, that is going to stimulate the new quest of the inner warrior, right? And then we started off talking about Mars in Scorpio and its tenacity and determination and patience to get what it wants and make the change and get it done, right? I like to call Mars and Scorpio the ninja Mars. I've said this before on the podcast, because it can get the job done. It can conquer its opponent, even if the opponent might be inside. But it does so with these tactics that are really strategic and thought out, and they take patience and they take intellect. And we're at the end of a dying cycle. That's another point of like to bring in all this sort of purge energy that we've been talking about, is that, you know, the Sun-Mars synodic cycle, it starts every couple of years. So we have these couple year chunks where there is our point of, you know, solar identity and consciousness that is pushing off a particular mission. And the last mission we pushed off of was the Libra one a couple of years ago. And of course, so we've had a cranky Mars. Think about Sun and Mars meeting in Libra, one in fall, one in detriment. Like, that is not a good setup for the last couple years. And why this one coming up is such a potent Martian push that is really steeped in this change that we're talking about.
You know, I'm building on that. Can I go back for a moment? Just thinking about Mars has been playing such a pivotal role in both of these eclipses, right? How do you see the transition from this, like the nodal change, right? From the Scorpio Taurus to the Aries Libra. What's your sort of vibe on the change?
Well, to me, it's like because we got to pull it back with the Scorpio Taurus action. Yeah. Because all that really got started, or it didn't really necessarily get started, but it coincided with the Saturn Uranus square. Yeah. So we had all this tension in fixed signs to begin with. So there's something to be thought of like just the breaking apart and the rearranging and the reorientation of the fixity in our lives. And that's why maybe they weren't, well, and I want to say maybe they weren't so as active as for some people, and some people they really were. Like there were definitely big changes that were made. But if you didn't make big changes and they were just all happening internally, these like fixated parts of yourself that were so rooted for so long, that's where this axis comes in and gives us that cardinal push the initiating. I mean, anytime you're going to have North Node in Aries pushing off of like cardinal fire, these are dramatic new story changes for everyone. And of course, when we have story changes, there's always, it's not just a solo mission. There's always people involved in our lives. And so that's where that Libra energy comes in, because then we are rearranging who's on the mission with us, who aligns with the quest, who can help us get to where we want to go, but in a way that serves all parties, because the nodal axis is always about a blend and hopefully a balance of the two energies. Even though like the whole Libra action that's going on right now with the South Node, and a lot of people, there was so many themes leading up to the solar eclipse where on social media all over the place, it was like people dealing with their people pleasing stuff, my people pleasing, pitfalls, the pitfalls of people pleasing, say that 5 times fast. And how people do themselves a disservice. And I heard it from all angles, right?
Yeah. I
heard it from all angles. People like, oh, you're doing yourself a disservice. When you please other people, you're not getting what you want out of life. And then there was another side, another camp that's like, when you people please, you're controlling the situation. You're getting what you want by people please. And I'm like, okay, well, now I've heard it all. I'm seeing all the different angles, but there was so much focus on how we live our lives in relation to others, and the avoidance of conflict or the need to directly or inadvertently control. So, and I saw it. It made sense. I get it. I started advising other people the same thing, found it coming up. So that's kind of where we're at now with it. Yeah. But so we're getting out of this last bit of the Scorpio Taurus, of the fixity. And right, it's eclipsing in the final of the Taurus zone, an exalted moon, right? Yeah. Venus is not in the best condition, but which we'll talk about here in a second. But it is this culmination of what is getting fixed in the physical, or what we are leaning towards to fully manifest, that will take the energy, especially of next spring, to really push it forward. Because next spring is going to be very dynamic. And the whole setup of what's going on now is what is stirring the compost, essentially, for the sprouts and the shoots. Mm-hmm. They're going to come up then. So I don't know if that answered your question. I think
it did. And I just want to say that I love thinking about this Libra Aries eclipse axis is like what's your mission and who's coming along. That's a really that's staying in my head.
Yeah. That's what I'm asking myself. That. No. Oh my gosh. So here we are at Scorpio season, already making cuts. Already making cuts. So just a quick lunar overview, since we've already been kind of talking about it, is we're going to have the Libra solar eclipse. Obviously we're under that. So this whole, the majority of the Scorpio season is going to be under that eclipse cycle. We have the lunar eclipse in Taurus, and then we have a new moon in Scorpio, which is going to be intense in its own right, because it's going to line up with Mars. And then we have these fixed quarters, right? So these fixed, activation points, and maybe sometimes irritation and challenge points that come back to what we were just talking about with like the fixity, and what we are trying to fix, and maybe what we're trying to unfix in order to move this eclipse energy along. We also have Saturn stationing direct, which that's always a party. Good old Saturn there over in Pisces. So we're going to talk about Saturn stationing direct, especially after Pluto did. So we have a couple heavy hitters that are now, we're getting all that direct motion back. Not all planets, but a majority. So that's big news. We're also going to have Mercury in Scorpio and in Sagittarius, which are talking about two funny... I feel like I just talked about this on the podcast, maybe the last episode with Rachel Lang. We were talking about Pisces to Aries, and so the energies of Pisces to Aries, and just that switch. Scorpio to Sag is another one of those where it's just like night and day. But we can talk about that when we get to Mercury. And we also have Venus in Virgo, who's playing a huge part in these eclipse energies. But she'll move into Libra during this season too, where she really likes to be, and where we may need to repair some relationships after this is all said and done. So we will see there. But I'm going to go ahead, if you're watching the video with us here on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and share my chart so Vivi and I can get into our full-on delineation of what is going on in the skies. We've done enough talking about generalities. All right. I have so many screens. I've got to consolidate here. So let me just get all this going. If you're watching us and not listening to me, you're going to see the Scorpio ingress chart, which is set for October 23rd, 2023. It'll be at 9:20 a.m. here exact on the Pacific Coast, which are you in Detroit?
I am.
Yeah, so it's the East Coast. Oh, we almost moved to Detroit. All my partner's stuff is still in Detroit. We have it in a storage unit out there. We almost side note with partners and missions. We almost
side
moved to
note.
Detroit.
I have a storage unit on the West Coast. We could like swap.
Oh, how funny. Yeah, we got trade those storage units. Yep. That's funny. So for people on the East Coast, like Vivi, that's going to be do the math, Mel, noonish. Noonish on October 23rd. So what's going on here? Okay, so we start off with a Aquarius moon, and we are pretty close. Yeah, we're just building to the eclipse. But the main thing is like the sun moving into Scorpio is immediately going to trine good old Saturn here. We were just talking about, who is not quite direct yet, but slowly getting there, sitting there at 0 degrees, right? Just cusping it in Pisces. So we just had go ahead.
Oh no, the word I kept thinking about when I was staring at these charts was like tease. Like it's like it gives me a little anxiety. Like Saturn's like threatening to go back to Aquarius, but won't.
It's like, you don't want me to go there again, do you? No. We're done with you there. Thank you. Your time was well spent. But Pisces is everybody was like, oh, Saturn in Pisces, it's going to relieve the astrological winter, which it did, getting Saturn out of its back-to-back domiciles. But Saturn in Pisces, I mean, where are we crazy where Saturn is? Like, no one's really crazy about where Saturn is ever. But Saturn and Pisces, what are your thoughts on just Saturn and Pisces experience in general, our first leg of it?
And my first thought is it's better than Saturn and Aries.
Well, don't ruin the party before we get there.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think I'm kind of personally thankful for Saturn and Pisces because I think it's been kind of grounding with like Neptune having been in Pisces for so long.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. Like I personally have, like, maybe I'm just feeling it because I personally have Mercury in Pisces and I feel like I've been on like sort of some very like extended like trip for a long time, and Saturn at least is adding some structure, even if then structure is like underwater fiascos and disasters. I
can see that. That's because Pisces could benefit from a little order now and then.
Yeah. Right. That's how I'm choosing to see it. I like that the sun's trining it. Like it feels it gives some support. And again, I just keep thinking of coming out of this sort of volatile moment.
Yeah.
But it's also been staring Venus down.
It started It's sort of it comes back to the well almost. It's like our well is like getting some stabilized support here. That emotional energy where, I mean, Saturn can feel limiting, but Saturn can also be, sometimes we realize that coming back to the boundaries, we just talked about getting out of very interesting and potentially volatile, but also exciting Libra season that's rearranging the lines of where, you know, you meet and the other begins. And so here we have in water signs this awareness of structure or boundaries or how to ease into that, and maybe put certain practicum in place that even maybe just emotionally on the inside, to where there's like this maybe fortitude or strengthening that can be like, you know what, I'm ready to transcend this issue and I'm ready for change. And you know what, it just feels like it might be easier now.
Yeah. And more of maybe like a mundane level. I don't know, something that came to me thinking about Saturn and Pisces too, of like this idea of like Saturn in the land of like dreams, shorthand, if you will, thinking about legislation around psychedelics, right? Like that's been like a big issue that's, I think, coming to the fore. And I just read something like a couple days ago, how California has voted to say that they're going to keep, like they've postponed, I think I'm going to get this wrong, so someone look it up, completely making psychedelics legal. Like I think the governor came out and said, we still need more information, right? So thinking about like Saturn as like authorities in a space feels really interesting to me.
Well, when you're speaking, what came to my mind is like, this could be a big switch that happens with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to happen at 0 degrees Aries. You know, think about Saturn being in that place of fall and like the structure and the legislation that we have around psychedelics or any type of mind-altering substance. And kind of beginning this whole new, pioneering this whole new cycle of working with substance and stimulus. And maybe that's where all this, the gray area right now, why they're like, oh, we have to, you know, Saturn, what does Saturn love? Saturn loves to delay. Saturn's like, hold on, we're not ready yet. We don't know enough. We don't have enough. We don't have it figured out or what this is going to look like. So that, I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I like the idea about Saturn, like in Aries with Neptune, the structure is dissolving. That's
well, and it could start a whole new world, a whole new psychedelic world where where maybe we work on people, the issues of humanity through expanding the mind into new territory. Maybe we don't conquer the new territory. We're going to conquer is the mind. Perhaps, but no,
that's I feel like that's a whole podcast episode on
that is a whole podcast episode
astrology,
itself.
The sort of legislation and even Saturn's movements in the next 2 years.
Noted. So we do start off sort of with this sobering boundary sort of influence, but also a fortitude, sort of strengthening energy with that Saturn. We've already had Mars there, right? Because here's the thing we got to keep in mind as we get up to the synodic cycle changing over with the Sun and Mars, which will happen, I believe, around the 17th. 17th, 18th. The Sun is going to be trailing. Same with Mercury right now, is going to be trailing all of Mars's moves. So Mars is sort of playing that pioneer with all the other planets right now, because it's like, okay, well, we're going to talk and we'll report back. And then, the action happens. And then maybe then we're like, oh, we start to perceive it or compute it. And then, oh, we start to understand it. And so there's just sort of this lead up where maybe there is just activity and maybe even some sort of destruction or disruption that might happen first before the full integration and understanding can happen after it, right? Just to reiterate the point that I don't even know if I ever made with the synodic cycle with the Sun and Mars, is that we're coming to the end of it. So this is like a deep sort of compost of the old mission and what we've learned and how we've integrated the last couple years. And beyond, it's not just one. Life is the Ouroboros. So there's extra, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's extra death here. take it for what you will. There's extra depth, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're ready to push into change and what your life could be like on the other side. So
did you say depth or death? Because it sounded,
I said death, but depth could work too.
I was like, that's great, extra depth. And I was like, wait, maybe she said depth. No, that's one.
No, I said extra depth.
Extra depth.
Just a little extra shake of death on what's going on right now. Just to put it to bed, close its eyes, to sleep. So here we have the sun just giving us that Saturn taste, trailing Mars. We also got Mercury. So here's the big thing that's happening that week, right? Because we start Scorpio season on a Monday, and we're basically leading up to the lunar eclipse that's going to happen on Saturday, on the 28th. And so we get the sun, Saturn, but then we have just this slow movement of both Mercury and Mars getting ready to meet up, but doing so in the opposition to Jupiter, right? So we're just cruising. We got some Pisces moon energy. It's always fun there. Revert back to Rachel Lang's podcast that I did with her last month if you want to hear about the Pisces Aries mixture. Or Vivi, if you want to share anything about your thoughts on the because that is the lead up. That is the lead up to this eclipse, is basically that Pisces energy to Aries energy to then eclipse Taurus. So what are your thoughts on Pisces meets Aries, or just kind of that transition that happens?
Well, personally, like I can maybe give you an anecdote from my own life.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting to think, right? So there's like a third of people who have the sun in Aries who have Mercury in Pisces. And I think about how that's such a conflicting thing, right? Aries is like, let's go, right? There's this moment of like action. And I think Pisces is just like in a float tank, like trying to like, connect with the ghost of like John C. Lilly or something. But thinking about the movement from Pisces to Aries always just feels very jarring. Like I wasn't prepared for this.
I was not prepared for this.
Where are my pants? How am I leaving the house?
That's funny. Wait, that is a good where I'm not prepared for this. I'm not prepared. Or am I?
And where are my pants? That's an important one. Where are the clothes?
Where are the clothes? Or maybe where are the shoes? So I think about Pisces. Where's the shoes? I'm ready to. You need pants though, or do you? Like it's up to you. It's up to you. But it is such a jarring switch. So there could be something about just getting that Sun Saturn action, and then the moon goes over Saturn, and then we just kind of sit in Pisces until through Wednesday, and then Thursday comes around, and then we get this Aries moon in this waxing gibbous phase, getting ready for an eclipse. And we got Mercury almost on Mars, which is Mercury and Mars coming together. It's always intensity. Like it's busy, right?
I think of that. It's funny. I don't know why, but I had this dream last night. I was thinking about just people like aggressively talking at me. Right? Like it feels just like that person with like the fast thoughts who just needs to just like talk at you. Right. Yeah. Or, if it's yourself, like this, like sort of, anxious, maybe anxious is the right word, but it feels very like mental aggressive.
Yeah. Well, anxious could definitely fit in there, especially if you're like hopped up about something and there's a lot of activity or a lot of action that needs to take place, or you feel like you have to take action, then you're trying to figure it out. And you're like, and it's just, or you're inspired and you want to do something, or you have all these ideas, but either way, it's just like a frazzledness of like,
it feels like, those people, because I think of anxiousness, I think like Virgo more, but those people who are like, they're thinking so hard, they like start sweating, right? Like that state of like, I have this idea. And just like the thoughts are going till there's like
the vein in the forehead kind of comes out. And it's like, it's, I think so much. I have a Mercury Mars sextile. And it's not a conjunction, but it's talking, and sometimes there's so much going on up here that I start to get like just tension. There's just a tension in my I can't even think of the word, in my temporal lobe. And I'm just trying to, and then I'm like, and then I'll be like, okay, you need to breathe. You need to not think for a second. You need to try to not think for a second.
You know what you said when we started this podcast? You said, hey, it's going to be 2 hours nonstop, no breaks. And at the end, we'll be sweating.
Yeah, it's perfect.
You called it. I
called it. That's but at least with the sextiles is enjoyable. And you're going to like every minute of it. You're going to come out inspired. So yeah, that's funny. So that being said, right, add a little, Mars in its domicile to that and the intensity of Scorpio. And the silence of Scorpio, right? Think about water signs as being mute signs. And so, maybe that intensity that we're talking about, and that sweat guaranteed, right? Water sign. There could be a lot of like internal process of that going on, especially with who's ramping it up. See, I feel like I know this, right? I got a Mercury Mars sextile, but I have Mercury conjunct Jupiter. So it's going to add to that as well. No wonder I think so much. And this is what's happening here is these two planets are gearing up for an opposition with Jupiter retrograde over there in Taurus. So let's just think about this configuration anyways, because it's going to perfect on the day of the lunar eclipse on the 28th, which I'm just going to go ahead and switch to so we can just start talking about that chart. But let's think about this lead up of both Mercury and Mars opposing Jupiter. And what sort of scenario do you think that this lineup can bring to the fore?
Oh man. Like, I was thinking about this earlier and thinking about like, I think what I used to phrase, I was thinking about the sort of like having like emotionally having to deal with like the facts of reality. Like I was thinking about emotions versus facts, especially with that Venus and Virgo ruling it. There's something about feeling like some sort of like earthly reality, but then also like, I think I said like emotions versus like facts. I don't know if this is coming across.
Well, I mean, it's always something that's I feel like that's always something that's going on when you bring
like
the moon
like,
and the
it's hard because you're like,
Mercury.
oh, the moon's in a really great place, it's full, but then thinking about there's something about like plotting about that, like Mars, it's almost like, I don't know, I feel like I'm gonna let you finish this, but I think of that like that standoff in Scorpio that we were talking to kind of stay with this imagery of like someone who's just sitting there like internally brooding and like they're like sweating and they're having all these intense thoughts and maybe they're confronted with something like really beautiful but they like refuse to smile.
Gosh, I'm like, I can see the times in my life where I've been there. I'm like, or like my partner will do that sometimes. I'll just be in like this mood and then he'll like try to joke with me or something. I'm just like, no, and then he'll be relentless. He won't. He's got a Mars in Scorpio. And he'll be like, relentless, and he won't stop. And then I'll eventually crack a smile. Right? It'll like eventually break the the intensity in the facade.
Like throwing like birthday cake at like Scorpio. Like here, like
although smile. Venus is not gonna like that. She doesn't want to be dirty. Venus and Virgo does not want cake on her shirt. There's no
I didn't say she wanted it.
But she's gonna get it. She's gonna get it. Oh my goodness. It's to me this is such a culmination to the intensities of the fixed energy of the last couple of years. Like to me, this is sort of I know Uranus is still going to be there and we still got Jupiter conjunct Uranus to go in April, which is obviously going to be a big month next spring. But there really is sort of this like hurrah of coming through the changes that have happened in all the fixed signs of our charts. I mean, especially Scorpio and Taurus, but if you got planets in Aquarius and Leo, especially if they're in those sort of mid degrees or the earlier degrees, basically the first like 12 degrees, you're really going to be feeling this eclipse. And I mean, anytime we're confronted with Jupiter, I mean, Jupiter is the planet of progress and moving forward, even if it's moving backwards right now. But it goes back to the internalization that we're talking about, right? The sort of the internalized moves, and maybe that the intensity of thinking of like, where am I going? How do I get there? What are the moves that I need to take? How do I find peace within all this? Who do I trust along the way? You know, like, or do I trust myself to be able to make these shifts? Or maybe I have made a shift, and then how do I then reroute and restabilize? And what are the logistics? What are the debts? I liked what I think it was Nina Griffin, who almost thought Kathy Griffin in my head. I was like, no, that is someone totally different. Nina Griffin. I think on her Patreon, she was talking about when Venus first moved into Virgo, about it being this place of calling in the debts, right? The of like what is owed, or like that being part of it. Like, is her, as when we think about relationship and partnering and just even our own wholeness inside, it's like these being very conscious of what is owed in the back and forth, and the debts and the logistics that come with all of this. And that can sometimes get in the way of peace, of the harmony, of the partnership, or keeping things the same, which is not always a bad thing, because how did we preface all this? We're in this place of change. So, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with all this, but that was
I like that idea of like calling in debts, right? It's interesting thinking about, like, as you mentioned, this sort of being the last eclipse on this axis. And there is something of like thinking about everything that we've been going through, this sort of fixed journey over the year and change, right?
Probably, 2021, really.
Yeah, like thinking about especially they're sort of yoked together, right? Like that Venus being ruled by that Mercury, right? Something about like this like full picture of the reality of the situation, because I also think maybe Jupiter can also act as like a amplification, right? Like a spotlight in itself. And so there's this set of like check-in of like, okay, we've been doing all this work in these fixed areas, like what do the pastures look like, right? If we think about this idea of like, maybe see the mushroom analogy, right? The fruiting body versus sort of the underworld of it, or the mycelium, right? You know what I'm talking about. But there's a sense of like, okay, like what is the reality of the situation in this space? And that sort of last bit of drive to like clear things up before we move on. Does that make sense? And I love the idea of calling the debts related to that, of like what cost and what's left to do.
Pretty much. I mean, it's not all cut and dry. That's the thing. It's like there's a lot of specifics and details that are all caught up in the change in the movement, that can't necessarily be ignored, because if we ignore them, then we aren't going to have that sense of peace or harmony, because there's all these, little bits and pieces that have to be dealt with. So how do we maybe sacrifice our comfort or our ease in order to deal with all the logistics? And at least now we're in this place of being more broad-minded, or maybe to go back to kind of what you're saying, Jupiter being that amplification point that will give us this place of understanding. And that could be part of it too, as we get to this, Jupiter's in that sixth of Pentacles kind of zone too, and sort of that give and take. So that really goes back and forth with some of the things we were talking about Venus, but that it's just sort of the I lost my train of thought. Let me pull it back. I'm like reversing in my head, like no, that point of just understanding so, and the meaning behind all of it. I mean, that's a big thing when you're getting, think about Taurus being the sign, or one of the signs, and Venus as well, of being this place of value, and meaning and worth. And so as we make these big moves and we're switching and we're changing, there is sort of this culmination of value and worth and the meaning behind it all. And even if we are making these, we're sort of, I always think about opposition as sitting on a fence. Like you're up at the top of the fence, but you got to go over, right? And so we're going over Jupiter. We're going over where we're growing, how we're expanding, what's the meaning of it all? What did we understand? What wisdom can we take away from everything that we've experienced? And how does that understanding then sit with us in a way that holds meaning, that holds purpose, that holds peace, that we can be still within ourselves, even if there is a lot of activity that goes around it? Because we are under the eclipse cycle of Libra, which really talks about peace as well. And peace isn't found from outside of you. Peace can only be cultivated from within. And so just coming to this point with all these planets and all these converging sort of things that can take us from our peace and piece us out in some way, pun intended, I suppose. There's just something about this eclipse that has that. I don't got words for it, just movement.
No, I think movement's good. I like the piecing out aspect. Like it does feel like, or the word you used, wisdom, right? Jupiter, right? Like what have we learned from this? It does feel like a moment of, what would you say, like integration too? It feels actually really nice. I mean, when I say nice, I don't necessarily mean pleasant, but
yeah. It feels
vital.
Productive.
Thank you.
It feels productive. Well, that's the beauty of oppositions, right? Oppositions are what give us the bird's eye view. It is the integration because we have the polarity. And so, if there wasn't a polarity, how we wouldn't be, integrated. We'd already be on that side, or we'd be, So there's strong oppositions taking place here. So that integration, and the wisdom that it takes to get there, is very, very necessary. But I like this eclipse. I mean, any eclipse is going to be a little hairy, just because that's the nature of eclipses. But there's something about this one where really just moves the party on. And there's just a good feeling about it, even if life is changing, and things are not as in your control, and there's a lot of moving parts to deal with. It's like, maybe you take this moment out, and I know I can already think of 2 Halloween parties that are on this night in my head. So maybe we just have a night out and we just enjoy ourselves in the midst of the chaos of life. We just get to have pleasure, in whatever form that looks like.
I think I also too, I like this eclipse because at this point, like whatever story this is for you personally, like, you know the story already.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like we're being introduced to something new, which is always comforting, right? Even if there's a plot shift or whatever, I feel like at this point, you have an idea of what's happening. So there's that as well.
Yeah. So think about where Taurus is in your chart. Think about where Scorpio is in your chart. And think about these areas, and what could be wrapping up there, and just coming to a head, because that's the nature of full moons. That's the nature of eclipses. Of course, eclipses take longer for the actions to really, show up over time. But just so you know, that's where that story is taken. So we're moving on from eclipses. We wipe our brow because now eclipses are done, sort of. And the next, astrology is never done. That's being an astrologer. Whew, it's a never ending job. It's a never ending. If I had, I refound, let's talk. It is Scorpio. See, I always make a joke. I'm like, if I could just push a button, right? Just put it and power down for like a couple of days. But any of you 80s kids out there may resonate with this. I came across an old TV show that I loved when I was young called Out of This World. And
Is that
yeah.
Is that the one where they had like the pause button? I was trying to reference this the other day. Okay.
And she'd go like this. She'd put her fingers together and it would stop time.
Yeah.
Yes. It would stop time and then everybody would stop and she'd be able to do things in between. And then she would put her hands together like this in order to stop it. And I found you can watch all those on archive.org in case you want to know, Out of This World.
That's amazing. I was trying to reference that the other day and no one had any idea what I was talking about. And then I couldn't remember the name of the show, but I'm so happy because that feels very significant now. It's coming up. I feel like there's something deeper. It's in the sort of the field.
Yeah. So if only we could do that. I guess that was my joke. If only astrologers could just go boop and then
rearrange the sky.
Yeah. Oh, well, wouldn't that be? Yeah. She was a half alien from the planet Arcturus. It was like kind of like Arcturus, but it was like they did a little play on letters there. Anyways, take it back. If you remember it like me, you can go down that wormhole. So we're moving on, and that weekend is just happen, right? Because the next day on the 29th is when Mercury and Mars conjunct, and then really the moon is getting ready to conjunct Uranus. So Sunday's got a lot of heat, a lot of flavor to it, a lot of activity. So just FYI. So let's keep moving on. There's plenty for us to talk about here. We're going to move on to Venus. She is... So one of the things that we didn't really talk about with the lunar eclipse, but I think we sort of inadvertently just brought it up, is the fact that Venus is getting ready to trine Uranus. So she's sort of in this freed up mode as well, where she's looking at things differently and trying to figure out the logistics and the workarounds and the innovation and the just free me up from all this stuff. It's too much. And so she's going to come around and trine Uranus on Halloween, actually, on the 31st, which makes for an interesting Halloween. I think we're going to have some intriguing costumes and very well thought out, detailed costumes that people might have put a lot of work in. I guess we will see.
Yeah.
But she basically is going to trine Uranus and then oppose Neptune. So basically October 31st through November 3rd, that entire week, Venus is... I feel like Venus is giving up. Venus like kind of gets a hit of like liberation, and then she's like, oh, just send me to Neptune. I'm over all this business. Especially with the sun opposing Jupiter on November 2nd. And then we have Saturn stationing direct on the 4th, which is going to be that weekend. And then Mercury opposing Uranus. So let's back it up. Let's save that Saturn Mercury business. Let's put that on ice for a second. But let's think about this Venus, Uranus, Neptune, and the sun opposing Jupiter, like the flavor of this week. What just initially comes to mind for the week of, like, basically a Halloween week?
Hungover. Like, I just think you said like Venus giving up, but I just think of Venus and Neptune being like, okay, I'm not even going to try anymore. Like, can't deal with reality right now.
Yeah. Well, it has this feeling of like, because there's sort of like this break free sort of energy that's just like, it's almost like this like let go and let God sort of thing, you know?
Like I don't know why, but I've been thinking of I made that post and you responded that movie Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. Again, another 80s movie reference. And thinking about, I just keep thinking about Venus and Virgo and like the power suit, right? Like she's getting things done. She doesn't necessarily want to, but she's going to do it for us. And then like the Neptune being like, but now I need like a long drink, maybe like 3 drinks.
She needs to decompress.
Yeah.
This is where she falls. This is the fall in Venus right here, is when she meets Neptune. And she's like, okay. She's like, I've dealt with all all the BS. I've dealt with it all. I've handled it all. Now I'm just going to check out. I'm just going to check out. I'm going to trust. I'm going to have faith. Maybe that's part of it too. You know, there could be this element of just faith that comes up, especially with the sun opposing Jupiter, where we just have to have faith in life and faith in people and faith in scenarios where it's just like, okay, well, I don't have control over everything, but I have control over myself and my own decisions. And, you know, very serenity prayer comes to mind.
I was thinking check out and check in.
Yeah. Right. It does feel very internalized with, because I mean, we have two oppositions taking place in earth and water. These are slower pace, internalized, you know, inside job sort of scenarios going on, especially after we just get out of like eclipse energies. We might just need a second. And look at that. We also have the moon in Cancer on November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for the most part. So she'll be trining that water. She'll be working with that earth. And so I'm actually going to be on vacation. I'm going to be on vacation from the 1st to the 7th, which I'm excited about. Going to Olympia. Gonna go give a shout out. Gonna go hang out with Gray. Gonna go hang out with Nicholas. Gonna go visit Cali, the Gens Arts Institute or library. So that's exciting. So I'm literally checking out.
I love that. Are you going to do any like, I don't know, like sauna party, or feels like there needs like self-care or any vacation-y things besides just like being with your friends?
Well, I would like to go out in nature. I mean, it's the beauty of the PNW is like there's lovely, you know, there's lovely nature scenes and watery scenes and probably rainy scenes. Is a very earth water. You give me a raincoat.
That seems perfect for this moment.
Yeah. So that's very exciting to me. I don't know if y'all are going on vacation or not, but that is my checkout, to just have a moment, get clarity, get the bigger picture, because that's the beauty of vacation, right? You get away from your life and you can be like, okay, well, now I can see my life from a different vantage point because I'm just not in it. And it's always so clarifying, at least in my mind, or rejuvenating.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about the oppositions being right, like the outsider's perspective of being able to see things clearly across the hall. Yeah. And I think that's like vacation is. I always thought like I think I write better, I think better when I'm in a different environment because I can like fully see my environment.
You're way more aware of it, right? I feel like I'm just more alive when I'm on vacation or when I'm just not in my normal state or place. And that could be my own makeup. You know, that could be part of it, but there's just something that really just jars, especially when you're a fixed personality. If you have fixed angles, you know, it's you gotta move. You gotta go somewhere different just to be able to crack the shell that you've created for yourself, or at least for myself. So
I love that idea of like cracking your own shell. That's a really beautiful image to work with. I also think of I'm in like paraphrase Gertrude Stein right now, but this idea of like, you know, I think she talked about how she couldn't write about America until she went to Paris, right? So you have someone who's like this expat who spends her whole life, right, like writing the Americans and all these things. But it was the perspective of being outside that allowed her to like see where she came from more fully.
Yeah, I love that. Context. Yeah. You know, context doesn't come from within. It comes from a distance. So so here we're back again at oppositions, right? Yes. That's what we're looking at right here. We're looking at Venus, Neptune. We're looking at the Sun and Jupiter. And so here we're getting the distance, which is exciting. So I am all for this. And speaking of distance, let's take us to the weekend, because that's where, if things are checked out and we have that moment to have like kind of a spiritual moment with ourselves and get the context and get the second, it's like by the time we get to the weekend, it's a little different. You know, we got Saturn, good old Saturn stationing direct at 0 degrees Pisces here. And we have Mercury. Ooh, went a little ahead here. We have Mercury opposing Uranus. Oh, that's always a good time, isn't it?
You know, I don't know why what he's been on my mind. Are you familiar with the interviewer Dick Cavett, who's like still alive, by the way?
Yeah. Oh, he's still alive?
I was having
Must
this
be
conversation
old.
with Sam Reynolds the other day. We just stumbled upon the fact that we both love Dick Cavett. And he's like, he's dead. I'm like, no, he's still alive. Still alive. But he has the Mercury Sun Cazimi in Scorpio, right? So I think the Scorpionic Mercury of just like probing, asking question after question, and then the like, you know, Uranus is being like, okay, like take some action. It feels like there's like that sort of startling.
There's definitely a startling. There's definitely a startling that goes on with Mercury and Uranus together. There's, which can be exciting, you know. That's the thing. So once again, we're at these oppositions, so many oppositions, and it's not every day that we get a million oppositions in the sky. A lot of times we go to these places where we're in conjunction. Well, conjunctions aren't as common, but a lot of times we're just in square zone. But there's certain times a year where we get an opposition zone just based on wherever the planets happen to be in the skies. And this is that place. So we're looking at the projection, we're looking at the other, we're looking at how we meet the world, how we meet people, what exciting things we meet, what people bring to the table that you're not expecting to hear or experience. And back to cracking the shell, right? Thinking about me being on vacation here. I'm like, show me something I haven't seen. Take me somewhere that it could be a surprise. Let's just meander, because we have the ability to, and the freedom to just see kind of what turns up. And that's exciting. And just there's shocks to perception from what it is we encounter, right? Which can be very stimulating. And well, just depends. Like my partner, while I'm going to be there, he's there too, but he's going to be on a men's retreat. So here he is out there in the wood with a bunch of men being shocked into different perceptions. Which is the point of the retreat, right? That's the whole point of the retreat, is to come from it with a different angle from your life. So there is something about Saturn, you know, going direct, which is a big deal. If you got any planets at the beginning of mutable signs, you're going to be feeling this station of Saturn, because it is essentially in hard aspect to your planets. And so Saturn, we already talked, Phil, we did some treatment on Saturn earlier. But what do you think about just Saturn emerging at the same time we're having like shocking kind of perceptions and sort of this like disruption of mental form or transactionary form?
God, it's interesting. I think the first thing that comes to mind is because in a sense, it's interesting because all of this stuff in Scorpio Taurus feels like a little bit of like wrapping up a story and like the sort of final conversations. And I think maybe Saturn emerging almost feels like the big, like, I don't know why I had this image in my head. See if we can work with this. But I was imagining like the opposition between like Scorpio and Taurus. It's like you're like on a job interview and you have to keep interviewing the next person, like all these oppositions, like going through and having to like learn more information, figure it out, right? And then Saturn's like the boss walks into the room and like, okay, but now we have to deal with shit. Like now this is like the reality of what's going to happen. There's something like a I want to say like like a reality check that comes into all of this. Like it's sort of solidifying things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and Saturn loves to give us that. He loves to, or it loves, you know, whatever you assign Saturn to, loves to give us the reality check. It loves to give us a little gravity and weight and serious consideration. but also form
Yeah.
and you know, some sort of like structure. And say you're in a great brainstorming session, right? You're having this Mercury, having this Uranus, and then it's like, okay, well, it exists out here in this field of thought. Well, what do you do to take the creation and like make something out of it? Like, how do you start putting form around it? Or what does that look like for the long term? Or how would we flesh out a plan in order to move forward with that at a slow pace? You know, these are all things that could come up.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of like, I love that brainstorming session, right? Like you think you're in a brainstorming session, you have like all of these great ideas, and it like maybe there's sort of multiple. And then like thinking about like your boss comes into the room, like, but you have to take this into account. It feels like there's going to be a sense of like, oh, there's something that I'm being forced to work with. It's not just sort of this freedom of the brainstorming.
Yeah. It's not. And when that's okay. Sometimes we need those boundaries, right? We need to have a little bit of boundaries. Or you can think about even with the Saturn story and what you've been experiencing with Saturn and Pisces for since it has moved in there. I'm like, when did it move in? March. Moved in March. So think about all you've experienced with Saturn now being in your Pisces house. And now it's like, okay, mission direct. Let us go forward. You know, this is going forward. So just thinking about it in that context, but also being in just a frame of mind overall, right? Because here's the thing is, who rules Saturn? Jupiter right now. And Jupiter's getting
I know the
up.
answer to that.
Yeah. Me. But Jupiter just got a workout, right? We just had, the sun, Mercury, Mars, the eclipse was near it. It's like Jupiter got some serious action. So the planet in charge of Saturn has been well informed by the sun. So there's something to be said about just that knowledge and coming back to the wisdom, right? That now can be integrated or into the Pisces zone. So it's definitely something for people that are going to have transits going on there. But overall, I feel like it's a good change of pace to have Saturn going direct. So basically around that whole time, we are leading up to the sort of the wrap or the next wrap of this eclipse cycle, right? We've passed the eclipses, but we're still under the Libra eclipse cycle. Where is it? Okay. And so on Sunday, actually really early in the morning here, we have the last quarter in Leo. I'm like, what sign is that, Mel? What sign? I think it's because I just said Libra. I was like, Lee, what's the other one? Leo. Right on my Jupiter. That sounds nice. And actually, if we think about this last quarter is actually where Venus stationed direct. So if you want to hearken back to that time, that was going on. But Leo and Scorpio energy. We started out this conversation talking about Leo and Scorpio. So having a last quarter and sort of a turn of events with these two signs has a sort of dramatic feel to it, in my mind. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the breakdown, right? It's interesting thinking about, I don't know, whenever I think of the moon in Leo, I feel there's like I want to say like sounds so bad, like a desperate call for attention. There's something, or even thinking about the sky as like a dramatic turn, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm like, how do I put this into words? I'm like, you probably know this with Mercury and Pisces.
I was like, is my Mercury and Pisces like rubbing off on you? Did you just
I got Mercury conjunct Jupiter, so it's sort of the same thing sometimes, where things just come abstractly or in visions or pictures or just concepts, and you're like, well, how do I articulate this in a way that I just know and understand? Yeah. Yeah, I know.
I've got you.
This podcast is now just going to telepathy now. So try to tune in, see if you can get it. No, but okay, now I totally derailed my thought.
I said
What was I
dramatic
trying to
turn
say?
for Moon in Leo, and you said, oh no, and you were getting a vision.
And I was I was getting a vision that just disappeared into thin air. I don't know where it went. I don't know where it went. I think we were talking about well, the dramatic turn, but also the need for attention. I mean, it really puts the focus on the sun itself, right? And so the Leo moon is going to be ruled by that Scorpio sun. So here that moon is receiving the sun ultimately, who is right next to Mars, who is its so it's very energizing in a sense. It might be very energizing back to the change, back to the strategy, back to the overall kind of mission that we're talking about that's about to seed, right? We're getting ever closer to this synodic situation going on with the sun and Mars. And so that Leo moon comes around and it's got us thinking about you know, our hearts and ourselves and being seen and being creative and being alive, right? I mean, there's a sense of being really alive and in the moment. You know, fire is all about being in the moment, in the now, that can get lit up at this point. And so maybe there's something, a spark in the moment, or an understanding of yourself or how you want to be and what you want to be seen for, that facilitates some sort of turning point that is part of the change, right? Because that's the MO of this Scorpio season. But it can definitely bring up drama. You know, maybe someone else wants to be seen this, or they're exhibiting that, or I'm extra passionate about this, or you know, and then all of a sudden you get into clashes with other people because you're extra you right now, maybe.
I don't know, this is maybe a non sequitur, but thinking about that drama and like thinking about the Leo moon, like maybe a way to work with that drama is to, like, I don't know, have like an outfit change. I always think about like Leo moons, to me always feel like secret Leos. Like I think about like someone I know who has this like lingerie store, because she, like, if you look at her and she looks very like just like you wouldn't guess that she has this like obsession with lingerie. And so there's something about like maybe like you're just Leo moon can, like, you know, have some fun instead of like, you know, causing drama. Put on a new outfit.
Do an outfit change, right?
Or
maybe that's when the outfit change happens. Think about it. Back to the back to that's the station degree point of the Venus retrograde, where she's stationed a couple months prior. And I remember Nicholas Polymenakos was talking about that on the podcast, about thinking about her emergence there. And it's like she's like, I've got a new song, I've got this new look, I've got this new, you know. And so maybe we did have that, but are we implementing it yet? I mean, she's almost a Libra. She's not quite there yet. She's about to tap into her integrity and seriousness here with that trine to Pluto, right? She's getting off of her break. She's getting off with her break with Neptune here. And now she's like, okay, I'm ready to get back to work. I'm ready to get serious. I'm going to trine Pluto, get into integrity, look at the shit, own it, and then move into Libra and be her best self. So there might be sort of that turning point around just energetically that spot in the zodiac. Change.
I love that's like the exclamation on whatever outfit change you made there before.
Yeah, because maybe you just bought the outfit. Maybe you haven't tried it out yet. Maybe you haven't worn it to the, you know, you haven't had quite the confidence yet, or you're like, is this me? But now you're like, you stare down Pluto and you're like, you know what? I'm changing. I'm a new person. I'm have a different aesthetic. I'm receiving myself and want to in a different light, and I want to exhibit in a way that I haven't yet. So I guess we'll have to test this theory out when we get to around November 5th here. When we get to the end of my vacation, we'll have to check that out. But it really brings us to, it's interesting. It brings us to the next week, which is the balsamic week, essentially, that is going to lead us to, that's kind of the darkening of the light that will lead us to the new moon that's going to happen the following Monday on the 13th of November. But there's a lot going on. So there's sort of two separate stories that are happening. Actually, just kidding. There are three separate stories, all from the personal planets. So we have our Venus story, which we're kind of talking about, which I'll pick your brain about here in a second, is this Venus trine to Pluto, and then her moving into Libra. So this is basically November 6th, that Monday through Wednesday, so the 6th through the 8th there. And then we have sort of, Venus is a big story, but Mercury's story is pretty all over the place. And whenever we get an all over the place Mercury story, that means we're in for a busy week where there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of up and downs, and there's a lot of this and a lot of that. And so Mercury is going to, so basically it's coming off that opposition with Uranus. It is trining Neptune. Then it's sextiles Pluto, basically sort of the same time that Venus and Mercury are both talking to Pluto at the same time. Then it moves into Sagittarius, but it squares Saturn.
Yeah, so good.
Right when it moves in. It's like Mercury's doing its thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, look at you all direct and talking to me. So that Mercury, so that's all happening from the 6th through the 10th, basically Monday through Thursday. And then once we get through that, just for context, just for that bigger picture, as we lead into the new moon, we got Mars getting close to an opposition with Uranus, which is a big deal and going to be part of this new moon. So let's back it up. Let's talk about that Venus first. Give me some thoughts on Venus, Pluto, but mainly give me thoughts on Venus and Libra. Or even just the transition of that.
Like, first off, I feel like I'm like excited for Venus Libra.
Yeah.
I just think so much of when I was thinking about the maybe it's on my mind, the present moment of this sort of like volatility we've been having with this sort of Libra Aries axis, which brings in like just so much of like Mars was in Libra, Venus is in Virgo, and so just Venus like coming home feels like it adds like just a sort of a sigh of relief. Like finally they're both home, because I think it's been tricky for so long.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when, she's in an interesting home, especially with the South Node hanging out there. She's sure. She's like swirling the drain. She's like gets in and she's like, oh, feels good to be home. She's like, what is this pull? What is this? Why am I getting slowly sucked into this force that is over across the house? I agree. I think she is going to be, it's going to be very helpful with, especially on the world stage, with coming to diplomatic talks around some extreme things that are happening in the world that I'm pretty sure we are all aware of. And the fair, what the justice around that, the fairness, the hearing each other out while also remaining strategic, right? Having Mars, because that's the thing, is we got to be careful. Like Mars opposing Uranus or leading up to that in a new moon that's basically seated in that. That's a very volatile cycle. So Venus she has her work cut out for her, I think. And that's like a big part of her being in Libra and getting closer and closer to eventually the South Node, is that her usual tactics might not be what's needed for these situations. Because a planet is, that's the thing, is I always have to remind myself that a planet in dignity, it's resourceful. It's got what it needs to do its job, but is its signification always the right thing that is needed for the job? Because it's consistency, and consistency is good when we need it and we want to be consistent in that area of life or that quality of life. But there's certain, I mean, there's, we got Venus in dignity, and then we also got Mars in dignity. Well, they're both in dignity and they're in aversion to one another, so who's sort of taking the cake here, especially just thinking about more the world stage and what's going on right now, because ultimately Mars is in, sort of in a stronger position, but it's also combust the sun. There's a lot of things going on there. But I guess what I'm saying is she's going to be glad to be home, but being home is not going to have the natural strength that she might be used to, and might bring us back to sort of the people-pleasing conversations that are having earlier, of like that not always going to be how to smooth things over in a way that is the benefit for everyone.
It's interesting thinking about that sort of volatile Mars situation, as you were saying, both of them having their strength. And I'm wondering with Venus, making her way to the South Node, right? There's a sense of like what she's forced to let go. And it does feel like a little bit of like complication between like maybe, yes, like you said, Venus being home, but maybe forced to like, I think of renegotiations, or like having to some like dissolve, like realizing what partnerships, what things are no longer working. Because it does seem like there's going to be an emphasis on that sort of letting go component.
Yeah.
Or a realization of what's not working, what's not just, in a sense. Yeah.
And, a lot of times people have their go-to negotiations. They're like, this is how I smooth things over. This is like, I know it's like, I got a recipe for like, just get this one I'm gonna say, this is a thing, this is gonna work. And then you're like, what do you mean it's not working? What do you mean that's not gonna do? So should just be aware of that with the transit there. It's going to be nice that she's home, but she's going to basically go through all the same things. And of course, we're looking much farther ahead here than Scorpio season. Just give a exact, because I like to give exacts. She is going to be on the South Node at the end of November 29th. And she's going to do the same thing all the other planets did, right? She's going to square Pluto. She's going to go, in and trine Saturn, right? And once she gets into her place of detriment. And so just thinking about Venus's journey. So really enjoy Venus while you can in those, those first parts of Libra, because she's going to have her work cut out for her a little bit later on. So that being said, let's pull it back here. Let's pull it back. So let's talk about Mercury. God, move much? So much going on. So trying to Neptune. This is how I see it. I'm like, I just have to rest. I can't think right now. Okay. Oh, I took too much time doing that. All right, I gotta get serious. I gotta focus. And then you move into Scorpio, and it's like, okay. Or you move into Sagittarius, and it's like, after you have that bit of focus, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's like free land again. Look at all the, and then Saturn's like, excuse me, you still have things to figure out and take care of. What are we doing here? And so it feels like a very roller coastery sort of mercurial ride. Where or maybe, we don't know this, so there's uncertainty here, but then we get this information that comes out of nowhere that we didn't know but influences the situation completely. Then you move into Sagittarius and you're trying to think of this bigger picture of like, okay, well, how do I approach this? But there's just a blockage because Saturn's like, well, you still don't have it all yet. So these are just the scenarios running through my head right now.
I love that. I'd like to love the vision of just like Saturn being this like blockage. I just, for some reason, I imagine like Mercury and Scorpio, like, contemplating things like very, very deeply, and then moving into Sagittarius and it's just like throwing ideas out there, like this one, and it just it hits the block of Saturn being like, no.
No, you didn't think this one out. I think of my partner who has Mercury in Sag, and it's totally a throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
Like that is that is, and he'll believe it. He'll believe it full, like, yeah, like, oh yeah, that's great. And I'm like, what? You have not thought this out, or like, that's not gonna work, or sometimes I'm just like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have just that blind optimism to be like, yeah, let's do that. Like, that's a great idea. Instead of me, I'm over here Virgoing out, going, okay, all right. Like, I can see that. I see the loophole in that. I see what's wrong with that. I see the potential barrier in that. So maybe that's actually two people. Who knows? You could be the Saturn and they could be the Mercury, or vice versa. But either way, there's sort of this sort of this perceptual or communicative kind of standoff that all this energy leads to, right as Mars is about to oppose Uranus, right? So it's
I will say though, there's a benefit to having that Mercury blockage, right? Like the throwing shit at the wall. Like sometimes you need that sort of the no, to save you from doing some really dumb shit. It's something to remember when you're getting frustrated with that Mercury and Sag. Like, wait, maybe there's a reason the universe is putting a blockade in front of me.
That could be true. That could be true. And that's the thing. That's always the thing with Saturn, is like we can't get past that particular moment when we're like, frustrated, and that's getting my way, or this is now delayed, or I can't figure this out, or whatever it is. But 9 times out of 10, there is such a purpose to that blockage or the hurdle or think about it like in just mutable form. It's a mutable square, and it's a mutable square that's ruled by the same planet. So we got to keep that in mind, because it's Jupiter. So it's not like they're totally at odds with one another, but Jupiter's still retrograde. Jupiter, is still chewing over its own thing. So it's just slower to flesh out. And sometimes and I think we talked about this earlier in the program about you can't just like force think your way through through things
as much as you want to.
As much as you try to sweat it out, you can't force think your way through things. So just give yourself a second, right? Give yourself a second. Especially since that Mars Uranus bit, that's big news. So that's going to happen on the 11th, because that's the thing, is like, if there's impulsiveness, now's the time, right? That's the nature of Mars and Uranus, is it's very, very volatile. It's very erratic. It's like, I'm restless, I'm itching to move, and I've got to do this, or I've got to free myself from this, or something, you're freed from something and it was of your own accord, right? Just situations and around you, or people, or the world, all of a sudden, shake things up and move things around. So
what it makes me think of too, like, I don't know why I'm thinking like the Mars, because it's Mars in Scorpio in its house, with making the opposition to Uranus. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation that just feels like untenable. Maybe it's like a job or a relationship, and you're like, it feels untenable, but you're just like, in your brain, you're like, I'm just going to keep going with this. I'm going to keep on. And then like it hits to such a point that maybe you kind of like unintentionally sabotage it, right? That Uranus feels like one of those days where you're like, shit, I finally said that thing to my boss that got me fired.
Yeah.
But secretly, I hate this job. Like, I feel like at its best, it could be maybe one of those moments of liberation.
I think that's brilliant, right? Because the Mars is combust the sun. It's not conjunct yet, right? It's like the sun can burn it up. We might have that blind spot, not see exactly what we're doing or how we're acting, or even just when we think about body actions and our subtle cues, that can be just enough to change the situation. It's like, you don't have to be like out there like doing the thing. Sometimes it's just your the attitude that you give off that changes a situation, right? And so, and if we're at And so we're at the granddaddy point of change, right? Like that's essentially what's happening here, because we have that new moon on November 13th on Monday. And so look at this thing. Look at this lineup. 20 degrees Scorpio, 43 minutes. Mars right next door. We're still 4 days out from the conjunction. Pretty much exact Sun Uranus opposition. So this is, and so just two things. One, whenever the sun is opposite Uranus, this is obviously the, outer planets are always retrograde, and this is the closest Uranus will get. This is in its perigee phase. So it's the closest Uranus gets to the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. So it accentuates the Uranian vibe over there in Taurus. Meanwhile, which is a precursor sort of to the conjunction with the sun and Mars, we have this trine to Neptune that is going on. So we're going to have to think about this bridging the gap between Uranian oppositions and Neptunian trines. One thing I just wanted to point out real quick, just to go back in time and kind of get a flavor.
Yeah.
Is to think about back in November of 2021, because we had an exact same situation with the exact different scenario. Of course, we don't have Mars right next door, right?
Yeah.
But November 4th of 2021, we had another new moon cycle that was seated in an exact opposition to Uranus. So if you kind of want to go back and, your playbook there, actually Mars was in Scorpio then too. What am I saying? Yeah. It's fascinating. Not as close, but there's something to be said there. So pull it back. I don't know what you were doing, Vivi, but
I was thinking to myself, I'm the worst astrologer because I'm like, where was I? No sense. I don't know. How many years ago was that?
What planet was I on? What? I know, and that's why I keep journals. I have kept a journal every day of my life. I've written about every day of my life, which is very excessive. Since 2015, so I always go back and look. So I can't remember either. I mean, I can vaguely. I got vague, I can kind of feel where I was at in my life. But especially for people that had important chart points in Taurus and Scorpio, this can light things up.
And that's interesting too, may I point out, because that was before, that was before this whole eclipse story. So I feel in some ways
about to lead in. Yep.
Yeah. We're looking at a life that has maybe been decimated, right? So maybe there's a story that started there and how far we've come.
Yeah. Well, because that, what was interesting actually is that was the first eclipse, the full moon of that cycle on November 19th was the first eclipse for the Taurus Scorpio eclipse cycles.
Yeah.
So kind of fascinating that we began that whole journey with a conjunction or with a new moon opposite Uranus, and we are going to round out that whole journey with a new moon opposing Uranus.
When you're just looking at that new moon, Uranus, the thing that was coming to mind was this phrase of cut it out, or we will cut it out for you, and almost thinking about whatever final strings you have attached to your old life, the cord's going to be cut.
Right? I mean, Mars, super decomposing, right? We're 4 days out from the turnover of the cycle. It's true, right? And so let's revisit back to our opposition to Uranus, trine to Neptune. What does Neptune like to do? What does it like?
My go-to Neptune is dissolve, but I think that's thank you.
Yes, exactly. Dissolve, diffuse. Yeah.
I keep thinking about that idea of that there's that maybe somewhere, right, what we call our unconscious or subconscious or whatever is working on our behalf, perhaps. we're playing out a story in the real world that like maybe we've dreamt up, even if we aren't like aware that we're doing it.
I could totally see that as a thing. There's a lot of subconscious vibes going on here. Yeah, the vibes from the deep well, basically, are like we're calling the bucket up, and it's going to. I love that though. Thinking about like the official cut from that zone of our charts. And cuts aren't always a bad thing. It's just moving the story along, right? That's the thing about Uranus and Taurus, is it's just like the shakes are there, but they're also so well grounded that for a lot of people it hasn't fully dislodged you. It's just rattled you the whole time, so how do we do the full dislodging, right? And I like it because it's like we also have Mercury sextiling Venus at this time. So it's moving away from that square to Saturn. Venus is in her domicile. So there's like things to work with as far as like communicating to other people, getting creative, like being social, piecing things out to move the transition or what's changing along. That seems very supportive just in the real world kind of like implication of what's happening.
And it's interesting even thinking about the transition between eclipse stories, right? So thinking about like Mars being there with that new moon to sever like whatever last strings we have to this old story. And then at the same time, Venus, right, being in her home of Libra, almost like, I want to say like softens, it sort of lends like a sort of a gift to this new, like a sort of like a blessing to this new story. It feels like a nice transition between.
Yeah, because I mean, we all want to change, right? I think that's how we started this podcast. We're all ready for this change.
Yeah.
So, these other aspects and components are necessary to that happening. But if we're in good spirits about it and we are open to it, and people are helping us along, and we're able to, discuss what it is we're going through and talk it out with others, and people are generous and helping each other, right? I think that it's a very supportive environment to a rather, disruptive and potentially volatile cycle that is necessary, right? Because that's essentially what's happening here. Is this whole week we are getting situated in this energy while the Sun and Mars are both moving to trine Neptune, and then they will conjunct right after they both perfect their trine. So technically that's going to happen on the 17th, Friday, and the 18th, depending on where you are in the world. For us here on the Pacific coast, it happens all on the 17th. But God, this is a podcast in itself, honestly, is the synodic cycle of the Sun and Mars and that trine to Neptune. And I know if you want to go back, Gray Crawford and I talked about it in our mid-cap of the year that we did, I think back in June or July. We did a lot of treatment on this conjunction and just this time period in general. So if you want to check that out. But I mean, where's your Pisces visions, your mercurial visions coming up for this trine and conjunction?
Well, I want to kind of back to something I was thinking about. I'm going to go back to Venus for a moment, if I may, in this whole period, because I liked how earlier when you were talking about the Libra Aries axis, and you said that like this idea of like getting an idea of like what our mission is and who's on the mission with us. And so thinking about like maybe this is a period of time with like Venus and Libra where like it's one of the things that we can start to rely on or figuring out like who our allies are from that new story. Gonna
need allies. It's a lonely road alone.
yeah. Man. I'm like, I like
it's
that
a
it's like
lot.
Neptune.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, like what are your feelings on Neptune? And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just like seeing like water floating in my brain.
I mean, Neptune is honestly one of the trickiest planets in the zodiac. Like when you have to go describe Neptune and Neptune transits to people, you're like, okay, I don't know quite how to describe this because it's it's gonna be different for
That's the thing
everyone.
about Neptune. It's always like, yeah,
It's you can't put your finger on it. It's not like you can put your finger through it, but you can't put it on it, you know? Like that's the thing. That's the nature of it. And to think about, we have a whole 2-year cycle that is steeped in this Mars, Sun, Neptune sort of action. It's very, God, it makes me think about what's going to happen on the world stage, only because Neptune is very, especially when we think about agendas and warfare, and warfare doesn't have to always be literally on the battlefield or anything like that.
Sure,
That could be just like people, you know, out for their own in the world. You know, Neptune loves to throw a subfusive tactic to things. Like you never know quite what you're getting when Neptune is involved.
Say deceitful is the word that comes. It gets worse. That comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, it's
You know, like,
just yeah.
you know, it's a strategy that's good if you're in charge, and like sort of a terrible weapon if you're not.
It's it makes me think of just like it's not something pleasant I want to share, but you know, you think about like noxious fumes when you think about Neptune and so we don't want to go. I mean, there's going to be challenges with this. We got a really strong Mars for 2 years, but we also have on the high side of things. I'm going to go high here.
Go high.
I'm going high into the ethereal planes of the Piscean realm and thinking about the nature of the dream. In the dream and the vision, and especially with Saturn there helping to like bring form to what it is that we imagine for ourselves. And here now we have the Sun, Mars seeding a cycle that is flowing with the dream. So if you're in this place of change and you're in reconfiguration and, you know, joining up on a new mission with new allies, or, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it's there, but it's not there. I guess, I don't know. Scratch that. But if you're
it's like comrades, people.
Well, no, I was thinking I had the word for that, but I was thinking about the rearrangement of them, like the you have a new brood of people that have signed up. Some are new, some are old, you know. Like
be terrible password that don't invite me on a game show. I wouldn't guess.
Yeah. So this feels good in that respect to me, because if you're making big changes in your life and you're going towards a dream that you had, or a vision that you've held, or an ideal that lives within you, like you're gonna need some strong strategy. You're gonna need the willingness to change, and that will hopefully help things get there. And also just being in the heart space, right? And like being emotionally attuned to that, and then putting your action energy behind it. Cause that's like the big point of like manifestation. You hear that all the time. It's like you can think about things all you want, but until the heart's there and the emotional charge is behind the concept or the idea or the intention, like things just fall flat. So here we have this really like loyal and committed Mars to whatever it is that is emotionally circulating within the individual. So that's why be aware of your emotions.
Yeah. I was gonna say too, I love this idea of like infusing it with a dream, and maybe your audience already knows, but I'll let you, if you wouldn't mind fleshing this out, what exactly is happening when Mars makes this Kazemi with the Sun. I think that might be a moment to meditate on.
Yeah. It's because that's the big thing. It's like that seeding of the like it's like the impetus. It's the action. It's like the Mars being in the heart of the king, the king's like, let me illuminate you on your orders.
Yeah.
And now you charge into battle for 2 years and I'll see you.
And
I'll
it's
see you
also, I
again
feel
in
like
Zed.
I love that. I like hear your orders, but I also think maybe too, like when Mars is the heart of the sun, it's like, okay, and you'll get a shower, I'll clean you off, I'll feed you,
Yeah.
right? There is this sort of fortification that happens, which is beautiful. And it's beautiful that Neptune's involved in that. It's like, oh, here's, some well wishes as well, or a dream journal.
Yeah. I'll give you I'll give you a Harry Potter invisible cloak. That's what
Nice.
that's like that. It's like, so you can make your way through. I'm just curious so we won't have, so that's actually very interesting because I remember looking this up before, if I do recall. Let me just backtrack to make sure I'm correct about this. Yes. So what's fascinating, just on the quick note on the Sun Mars cycle, is last time it happened in Libra, which we talked about the difficulties of both planets there. During the pandemic time and leading up to the pandemic time, we had back-to-back Sun Mars conjunctions, I believe, in Virgo. We had it twice, which is not a usual thing, right? So was it? Or no, am I making that up? Mel, did you just make that up? Where am I getting that from? Oh,
It's
I think
Neptune.
Yeah,
Neptune
never mind. Neptune's happening. I don't know why I thought that was twice, but usually what happens is it goes from sign to sign, right? In 2019, it was Virgo. In 2017, it was Leo. But what's going to happen is when we get this Scorpio one, the next one actually is in January 2026, and it's going to be in Capricorn, conjunct the Sun, Mars, and Venus all together. So here we have going from a Mars Sun synodic cycle in its domicile to a Sun Mars synodic cycle in its exaltation. So we're having like 4 years, essentially 4+ years of this incredibly strong martial action, which is interesting to think about on the world stage, but also fascinating to think about when we're thinking about the mission and what we want to achieve and accomplish in our lives and what it's going to take to get there. So I just want to give a little.
Oh, look at Venus in that party.
I know, she is right. It's all happening at the same time. We have these, which the Venus Sun cycle is just as important as the Venus or as the Sun Mars cycle, and they play big roles in our interpersonal world, and in your own life based on the cycle that you were born under. So this is huge, actually. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but that's big news, right? That's big news, but not big news for quite some time. So
I was like, I can barely handle the present moment. Don't throw me 4 years
you're
ahead.
like, don't throw me the head. Can't get there. So in the interest of saving time, because we are running long, we are going to move forward, knowing that is a potent time of moving forward with that Sun Mars action and Neptune involved. We're just going to have to live it for the most part. So we have a first quarter in Aquarius that is going to happen on Monday, the 20th. Can't really see it right here, but so basically we have an interesting first quarter in Aquarius that then goes on to conjunct Saturn exactly. So that Monday will be very sobering, probably, for what it is, right? We go out of this place of like, I'm in the dream zone, I'm doing this, I'm conjuncting here, and I'm feeling all this change, and then the first quarter comes around like kicking you into gear and you're on Saturn. You're like, oh, okay, well, how does this all work? But at the same time, right, because Sun and Mars are just slinking along together, they're sextiling Pluto, and that's essentially how we end Scorpio season, is this Plutonian pathway that we can work with. Any thoughts on sort of this cap of action?
I mean, just how like different it is from that, just how different that
Yeah.
moon Aquarius story is from when we had that moon Leo story. Like it does feel way more like this, the combination of the sextile to Pluto and the like moon Saturn situation has a sobering is the right word. But I
Yeah.
think like there's something kind of like, I mean, it's, of course, things are neither good nor bad, but I think there could be, right, like a sense of just, especially thinking about that Mercury and Sagittarius just throwing shit at the wall. And it's like this kind of like reality just creeping in on like
Yeah.
multiple layers. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Like the sort of heaviness.
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting part of it, right? Because we can be in our ideals and we can get charged up on the dream, but then all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, what's the logistics here? How does this all work? Am I integrity with this? What has to, what really has to shift and change? What heavy lifting do I need to do? It's because it's not all vision. It's also like the application of it. So yeah, Mercury might be a little like, oh, okay, but that's the beauty of Mercury and Sag too, is that it's an enthusiastic headspace. It's ready to be like, okay, well, what do we do? Let's go explore this. Let's try this. Let's keep our optimism around everything that's shifting, even though it's sort of intense. It almost lightens up from like a perceptive standpoint of what it is we're dealing with, because we can be attached to the bigger picture or the wider view, and not mired in like, maybe the emotional stuff that comes up with it, or the heavy like earth things that we have to do. We can kind of keep our brain enthused, I guess.
I love that. I think of like the only challenges here might be like think about like part of like I think that Mercury and Sag really getting excited to want to like do things, and the rest of the sky is just kind of like slow down and think about your plan.
Yeah. And
Very
so
cool. Yeah.
we'll see. And then I just see that Venus Chiron just inching up there, but that's another story for another time. So we will leave it at that. So all right, Vivi, like we got to wrap it up with a one word. This is the difficult part of the program, where I ask you, if you had one word to describe Scorpio season, what would it be?
Sobering. I think that's come up a lot and I like it.
Sobering. I feel it's like I'm like, didn't we start with like the serenity prayer? It's like we're gonna be sending people to AA, like everybody's get you in a program.
Do some psychedelics to like get
No,
the
it's
story
true.
straight.
Yeah, I feel you on the sobering front. I definitely feel you on the sobering front. Yeah, I'm like, God, the one word. I got the one feeling. I'm like, oh, the one feeling. What's the one feeling? I guess just the word intensity comes to mind. I mean, it's pretty generic, but there's something intensity is. I love intensity because speaking of Scorpio rising, but I love intensity because it brings you to the brink of something. It's like when things are intense, you're in it. You're hopefully dealing with it. You're ready to just and it can make you feel really alive when things are intense in your life. And intense can feel very uplifting and like and it can also feel a little back to the sobering, or like, oh, that's a lot. Yeah.
I think like, would you describe it more as or do you see a difference between like mental and emotional intensity?
Well, speaking as a third house moon, those kind of come together. But I think more just emotional. I think it always comes down there. I mean, it might creep into the mental aspect, but if it's in the mental aspect, it's because the emotions have brought it there. Like we're chewing over it at that point because we're trying to understand how we feel, or what's happening. And And the like, and it, I mean, if I amended it, the intensity of, it would just be change, you know, like it's just the, and navigating that, getting excited for it, right? Like life is what you make it.
I like that emotional intensity because it feels like it's way more, even though perhaps challenging, right? It has a way more like inspiring. I think sometimes intensity can be inspiring.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, think about it. If you ever fallen in love, like that's intense.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's like, essentially that's what intensity is. It's a lot. It's a lot to hold. It's a lot to compute. It's a lot to experience. But you know, that's usually what happens when we're in these great periods of shift, is the intensity that comes along with taking that ride and making the shift.
I'm going to defer to your word. I think we can just unified intensity. That's really good.
Yeah. Oh, there'll be some sobering moments. Don't you worry about that. There will definitely be some sobering moments. All right. Well, okay. Well, Vivi, so I think we did a pretty bang up treatment of Scorpio season here for all the people that rode the wave of our intensity to get down to the nitty gritty of all the specifics. So tell people where they can find you, what you got going on, if you have anything coming up, etc.
Yeah, well, I'm Vivi Henriette, and you can find me at Art of the Zodiac in all the places, right? But specifically follow me on Instagram, I guess Threads. And I have a Substack, Art of the Zodiac, presents Talk Talk Talk. So if you follow me there, you can get on my newsletter, and I'll send you links to my weekly podcast where I interview people. And let's see, what fun interviews do I have? I just did a recording with Gabe Rosas and Sam Reynolds that's coming out. And Gabe and I are doing a Patreon only like talk this Sunday. So if people want to join my Patreon, they can come to that conversation. But yeah, I interview people all the time. So please follow me. I can push that because it's not just me.
There is, if you go check her out, you'll definitely see a wealth of interviews and lots of talking.
I'm gonna talk myself to death.
Just talking over there, talking all types of fun things. So definitely go check her out. You can find me on energeticprinciples.com, where I will also share Vivi's information there. And you can find me on Instagram at Energetic Principles. And you can also find update for those of you who didn't know. I don't think I said, maybe I said it in the beginning of the podcast that hasn't been recorded yet, but the tarot of her was successful, and we have finished our fundraising campaign. And we're successfully funded. So I'm in the process of finishing writing the book for that and starting to get the production going. So if you want to learn more about that project, you can go to tarotofher.com or find us on Instagram at tarotofher. We also recorded a bunch of commentary videos on all the minor cards. So if you want to just hear about the cards and see them and listen to our banter about cards in general, you can see that on Instagram. But we made enough to do a small run. So we're going to do a small first edition collector's run. So there will be a few decks available if you weren't able to pledge on the Kickstarter, but the only way to get those would be to be on the mailing list. So you're going to want to sign up for that. Because when I say few, there's probably going to be less than 100, maybe less than 50. So it's not going to be a whole lot. So FYI, get yourself in place for that. What else do I want to share? Sharing in general. Sharing is caring. Spread the good news about the podcast. Share it with a friend. Share on social medias. Make a meme of it. I don't care. Like just spread the good word. And if you are watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. Let us know what you think Scorpio season is going to be like, and what you or maybe even what you're already experiencing with eclipse season. We'd love to hear that. And if you're listening to on podcast style, leave a review, especially on Apple Podcasts, because that helps the podcast be boosted in the ratings of, there's a lot of podcasts out there. A lot. It's hard to be seen. So help a girl out. I think that's it. I think we have come to the end of the Scorpio journey here. Vivi, it was so much, it's such a pleasure to chat all things Scorpionic with you. I'm so glad you were able to join me today.
Oh, I'm so happy I got to be here. This is lovely. Thank you.
Well, and thank you all for listening in and tuning into us talk.
Yes.
Yes. And we wish you the best of luck through this time of change, and we'll see you on the other side. And as always, may the stars be with you.